Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Captive Audience. It is the 10th of June. I'm Kevin Hoare and one of your regular Tuesday night guy. And we have one of our rather regular guests, actually, who brings to us the most interesting perspectives, the greatest insight on so many things that are happening here in Oregon and the Oregon perspective on what's happening nationally. It's Jeff Eager. Jeff is the former Bend mayor, a blogger, podcaster, investigative journalist, and you can find his blog at OregonRoundup.substack.com or at x.com/Jeff_Eager, EAGER. And welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be back.
So, the biggest story in the news right now, and you actually just wrote a blog post about it, and it's a developing story, right? It's what's happening in LA, which is amazing, considering the fact that it feels like deja vu all over again from 2020. And so many of the people that, actually had something to say last time on the wrong side of the so-called mostly peaceful protesters in Portland and Seattle. Now it just feels like a repeat in LA, but now it's also around an issue that the voters voted to have immigration enforcement conducted, starting with criminal illegal aliens, the worst of the worst, and they're resisting. And the LA police and the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, they've actually made the same wrong decision at this point. The mayor in Los Angeles as well, that happened 5 years ago, and actually that's exactly what your blog post pointed out in very clear style. Why don't you tell us kind of what you noticed that you covered?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Kevin. I think the big thing about what's going on in LA right now, and then I'll try to compare and contrast it to what was going on in places like Portland in 2020 ad nauseum. So in LA, I think at its crux, what we're seeing is what was probably an unavoidable clash of views about the enforceability of federal immigration laws in Los Angeles and other blue jurisdictions. So, and that comes about because of the way that these blue jurisdictions have been led in recent years. And the way they've been led with regard to immigration enforcement is, legally speaking, they are sanctuary states. They've passed these laws saying California and Oregon have both passed laws saying that local law enforcement, state law enforcement can't help enforce immigration laws within the state. LA has its own ordinance locally that does the same thing. But even beyond those sanctuary laws, the rhetoric, and I see much more of the rhetoric from Tina Kotek, Oregon's governor, than from Newsom. Although I do see lately, I've been seeing a lot of the Newsom stuff too. But in general, especially here in Oregon, what you've seen is the governor going out and saying to the immigrant community, or she says she's saying it to the immigrant community, I've got your back. We're going to look out for you. We're going to do everything we can to help you. And I think between that rhetoric and the legal status of sanctuary states, I think honestly, people have given the idea that maybe federal immigration law doesn't apply in these places, right? And that's sure the way Los Angeles is acting now, or the minority of Los Angeles that is actually engaged in the rioting down there, is it's just a defiance of federal law. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. It's a direct obstruction of the rightful enforcement of federal law. And the last president didn't choose to obviously enforce these particular federal laws, but they're still federal laws, and this president is enforcing them, and he's entitled to, regardless of sanctuary state status. The state and the city cannot stop the feds from enforcing federal immigration law, and that's what this is about. And that's why I called my article LA's nullification crisis, because the United States has gone through this stuff before, in the
Yeah.
1800s with the tariff, later in the 1800s with secession itself, and then most recently in terms of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, where you had recalcitrant southern states led by Democrats, by and large, who insisted on maintaining a Jim Crow racial regime that treats people differently based on race, even though the Constitution of the United States by the 1960s and then federal law, especially beginning in 1964, said that these states couldn't do it. And that's why the National Guard was sent down south in the 1960s
Alabama. Yep.
to force compliance with federal law. What's going on in Los Angeles right now is just the most recent iteration of nullification and an attempt by state and local government officials to not abide by and to prevent the enforcement of federal law. And
Yeah, just a few months ago, Democrats were, saying there's no way that this nullification situation that many counties are trying to engage in with regard to the Second Amendment restrictions, that's another iteration of a Democrats. Well, you can't do that.
yeah,
Well, actually, they can't. So I think that's been largely the legal result. You mentioned 1964. It's interesting that in 1965, where federal law was not being followed, where they were actually trying to protect the civil rights of civil rights protesters, Lyndon Baines Johnson called up the National Guard without consulting with or getting the concurrence of the Alabama governor, who was hostile to the civil rights movement, and sent them. And Democrats are fine with that now. It's interesting that
yeah,
it was Democrats that had a problem with it in 1965 in the
yeah,
South, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's really something else. And honestly, I think that what we're seeing right now with the kind of immigration nullification crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. I've written a lot about how Oregon is openly in violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, right? So that
Yep.
it's because of the racial preferences and outright bias it writes into its laws. That's just not legal. Oregon pretends it is and keeps doing it, even though they've been sued on some of these programs and lost and then had to fold those programs. They keep doing it with the other programs, but those are illegal too for the same reasons.
Yeah, they just spawn new programs and the new court cases, and they just keep doing it over and over, which I don't know. It seems like does the law have a solution for constantly violating the law and just creating more court cases that really have no chance of they have no chance of prevailing when they do it over and over.
Well, the solution and the remedy is a persistent and aggressive enforcement by the federal government, just like what upended Jim Crow. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really the same thing. And if you don't have someone at the top of the executive branch who's willing to enforce federal law, then it doesn't get enforced. And then you get places like Oregon and California who kind of do their own thing. And I think what we're seeing is the beginning of the confrontation that comes from that.
It's interesting too that this other debate has been kindled, and I believe I just saw a headline just a few hours ago. The California governor has challenged the ability of the president to activate the National Guard over his objections. on the basis that he did it. And there's no stay that's been given. There's no blocking what President Trump is doing by the federal courts. And so, and I've heard several explanations today. USC 10 is actually really clear. Like, when federal law cannot be enforced, that's in effect a rebellion against federal law. And when it can't be resolved by other means, which it can't be when federal law enforcement is going in and enforcing federal law as it's on the books, as it's well understood to be. And they simply don't like it because they don't like they have a political objection to it, but they don't have a legal objection to it. They start interfering with federal law enforcement, and then they start rioting. He has the perfect right, doesn't he, to activate the National Guard and other military units if necessary in order to quell what is an uprising, which amazingly, and the first time I saw this, I couldn't believe that these guys are this dumb, but carrying Mexican flags all over the place. That's not how you win over Americans. They've made this mistake before. They usually correct it. This time they're not correcting it. And the Mexican president, she made a few misstatements, didn't she? In the beginning, she kind of tried to sound like she wasn't exactly going to discourage the rioters. And then she came out, I think, yesterday and discouraged the rioters. But now the Democrats are stuck, aren't they? Because they can't put this genie back in the bottle. The 1965 analogy is that they're on the side of the Ku Klux Klan going after people that are standing up for the law and civil rights.
Yeah, isn't that ironic? And it's not I haven't written about it yet because it's kind of a out there take. But I think that the evidence is mounting that this is a Jim Crow style thing we've got going on out here on the West Coast.
Yep.
Where complete with the de jure state mandated, state sponsored, state required racial discrimination.
Yeah.
Like it's just we're just out here pretending that federal law doesn't exist, and that doesn't go anything to the moral desirability of these policies, which in my mind are bad. But the underlying legal dispute is really, does federal law apply in Oregon and Washington, and Oregon, California, and probably Washington and other states as well. That statute you mentioned, I'm less familiar. I haven't researched his ability, the president's ability to dispatch like the Marines, which he's doing. So I can't say much about that. But when I was writing the article, I read the president's executive order, and I read the statute upon which the executive order relies, and that is 10 USC section 12406. And I'll just read it. It's short and it's pretty clear. So it just says, whenever the U.S. is invaded, which isn't the case, that's 1. 2, there is a rebellion or danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. Or 3, the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. The president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress the rebellion, or execute those laws. This isn't like the area of law I practice, so I'm certainly no expert, but that statute, I think, is really clear and right on point, especially with the third prong of it, which says if the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, he can federalize the National Guard and have them help with that process. I think that is exactly what's happening in Los Angeles right now.
It is. And I think that this is a lesson to the Democrats who thought this would be good politics. And I still don't see the good politics in it. I guess they didn't get 2024. There's people that seem to have missed the lessons of the last election cycle, but I'm not going to stop somebody I consider to be on a different side of the fence for me politically from making bad political errors. That's their job to figure it out. But I do think that this is now it's mushrooming too. There's an additional dimension to this, which also made me think of you when I was reading these stories because of all the stuff you've done about Oregon and these nefarious efforts to get campaign finance funding to people, to get government funding into different folks, and the graft and corruption and ethical problems. This is a layer to this story because it looks like the anti-ICE protests, the group that's leading it, that's organizing it openly in the lead, received 96% of their funding from the state of California, and they still do. And they also received some funding from the federal government, a smaller portion, but it was kind of a merit grant because they were just doing such a super awesome job at promoting the Biden illegal immigrant invasion. And then on top of that, apparently this group is also raising money via Act Blue, the Democrats' fundraising machine. You almost can't, like I couldn't have made this up and people would have believed that it would have this many tentacles to it. But it appears that now the FBI is all over this. Kash Patel is like, we're looking into this. We're looking into who's funding and organizing these riots, which is what they should have done in 2020. So in a way, the Democrats haven't learned a lesson from 2020. But I think maybe Trump and the folks he's got in his administration have, because they didn't really do anything to go after Antifa, and which is a interstate conspiracy worthy of any RICO prosecution for committing a bunch of crimes. And they didn't do that. They didn't go after the funders. They didn't, break this down and rack and stack and get them all charged. They're going to do it this time, maybe.
Yeah, maybe they will, and they should. If these guys are breaking federal law, then the feds need to enforce that law and put them away, because this is what's going on right now. What's happened in 2020 and is happening again now. If this turns into like national urban violence over immigration, it's a real threat. That is a real threat to the safety and security of Americans. And it's being perpetrated, quite frankly, by a pretty small minority of people who are just going to mess it up for everyone else. And, these places where, Los Angeles, Portland, et cetera, they're obviously heavily Democratic areas, but a lot of the Democrats there don't like this kind of stuff. The problem is that they and their elected officials are terrified of speaking out against it, as we're seeing again in Los Angeles, because they don't want to be seen as being, allied with Trump in any way, shape, or form. And they think that these rioters are a part of their team. They think they're part of their coalition, and they are kind of.
Yeah.
The thing is I don't know how much the Democrats can control that aspect of their coalition. I mean,
they had that problem in 2020 in Oregon. They kind of lost control of them. But I always described them as the militant wing of the Democrat Party because that's how they behaved. But like any militant wing anywhere in the world of any political entity, is that sometimes they lose control of the militants, and then the militants actually overthrow them. And I think that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's an excellent observation.
Well, a party that's actually seriously considering AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as their top prospect for the nominee for president right now, over the guy who's actually thumping his chest, Gavin Newsom, and trying to stop the president from quelling this insurrection against federal law. I think that this is what's at stake. The Democrats think this is just a political issue, but I think it goes deeper than that. And also, we never really got a resolution of what the media did in 2020, and they think it worked in 2020. So they're trying to repeat it. The mostly peaceful protests, flames going behind them. And
Yes.
I've heard we're watching all the video in down in Los Angeles, and I've heard the descriptions of this too. The police are surrounded. In fact, the police weren't even engaging with the protesters, and the protesters found them, started throwing bricks at them. They had to flee their vehicles,
Yeah.
take cover under a bridge, and several of them tried to go back and obtain something, probably firearms, to protect themselves from the vehicles. The vehicles got smashed up, and several of them got injured and had to go to the hospital.
Yep.
And they weren't even actually engaging the protesters at that point. So
Yeah.
this is like, how can this anti-law enforcement thing be creeping back into the Democrat Party? Because it actually really didn't work that well for them last time.
No, it didn't. It didn't. I think that, I think Trump ended up doing quite a bit better in 2020 than most people expected heading into that election. And I suspect that violence that occurred in 2020 contributed to that,
Yep.
to him kind of having that that base of support that was much bigger than what people thought he had. I saw that video you're referencing. I saw that of the people up on the bridge dropping bricks, and those those loaner e-scooters. They were dropping those down on the police cars and just damaging the heck out of them.
Well, they were yelling and chanting, "Aim for his head."
Yeah.
They were telling the people that were throwing the concrete blocks. And then there's some guy that the Attorney General Pam Bondi has kind of put out a nationwide APB on. They say they know who he is, and they're like, "Here, $50,000 reward for finding this guy." And he's like one of the main initial guys that went and started busting out windows and engaging in violence. What it seems like now is that it's a multi-layered protest, because there were originally just people interfering with law enforcement in these raids in Compton and in Paramount, the two towns in Los Angeles County, where there's a lot of Hispanic population, and this is where they're going for the criminals and some of the people that are harboring them. And then there's a group of like joiners that just showed up like on Saturday. A lot of people that just weren't at work, kids out of school, nothing to do, and they just kind of joined in on it. And some of them are joiners and leavers. I think some of them disappeared on Monday. And then there's another group that I've heard, which is the white protesters in Black Bloc, and that's Antifa. And apparently those are the people that are directly engaging the police because they smelled an opportunity, right?
Yeah. It's super weird. I mean, I remember growing up in when I was young in the 80s, but then kind of coming to be aware politically a little bit in the 90s and even the 2000s. And just, you learn about all the riots, the bombings,
The Weather Underground.
The Weather Underground, just the internal discord that America had during that period of time. And I remember thinking, thank God we don't have that now. Like as a teenager or whatever, like that would be so weird. Well, it's happening again, and it's the same ideology that's driving it. It's just they have different excuses and their excuses shift, but it's the same ideology that's driving this attack as drove the attacks in the 60s.
Yeah, it was just repackaged Marxism and a critical theory just applied to different things. And so, it's interesting. Okay, so this story has developed, and then there's these layers of funding, and they think that because the thing Act Blue got in trouble for was foreign funding.
Yeah.
And so they're going to see, I mean, if the president needs any national security justification, foreign funding of a group that's engaging in this insurrection against people who are here illegally being deported, that fits squarely in the national security wheelhouse too of the presidency. And so
Yeah.
I think we know which way this is going to kind of go legally. But then, we look at Oregon, and you've got a variety of stories that kind of sound like the same pattern, right? They think they can get away with stuff. They think it's just a political issue. And you've had several really great articles about this. One, of course, I think you were hinting at when you talked about Oregon engaging in racism and getting away with it. You called the bias hotline and and filed a complaint, and you found out that the DOJ actually discussed this, but they just didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah, Oregon has this has this bias hotline, and they were really publicizing it at the beginning of the Trump this Trump administration, and they threw more money at it because they pretended to think that there would be more bias complaints just because Donald Trump's president, I guess, and so I was reading this stuff, and I had been doing all this work on, the racial discrimination that we were talking about. That's just throughout Oregon law, and so I decided to file a bias complaint to the state of Oregon about the state of Oregon, and I didn't know really what to make of it or whether they would ever. I thought I'd get just a call back from someone saying, like just to take more
Nice
information,
try.
whatever.
Yeah.
And so, a few months went by or a couple months went by, and I emailed the bias hotline people, and I was like, what's going on? And they just stopped responding to me at some point. And then, so I just did a public records request, and, people in DOJ, the deputy AG, the spokesperson, and others were emailing about the complaint and what they should do about it, and all that. And the long and the short of it is they never responded. They never acknowledged to me my bias complaint, even though they promised that
your complaint.
Yeah, and it's I think they would disagree with the premise of the complaint, but it is a bias complaint and it is legitimate, and I would appreciate a response. I really
a
would.
complaint hotline that ignores complaints is not really a complaint hotline. It's a political stunt. Some of the other stories, an architecture firm that's on a board voted for funding to the tune of 189 million that's going to end up being spent with their own firm. I don't like, you can't even make this up. That somebody would do this. Can you describe that briefly?
Yeah. So there's this woman who serves on one of these advisory boards that the state of Oregon has. And this particular board authorizes big chunks of state financing for quote unquote affordable housing.
Yeah.
And a lot of what they do is spend a bunch of money on these kind of new affordable housing complexes. And one of them's in Hood River. Anyway, this woman that serves on the board on this committee that has to approve financing these things, she's an architect by profession, and she works at an architecture firm in Portland that actually is a subcontractor on at least 3 of the projects that she has allocated $180 million to. And it's just a blatant conflict of interest under Oregon law. And there's a guy, the reason I found out about it is there's a guy that is actually pursuing it, has actually filed ethics complaints against her. But we know that the ethics commission in Oregon is pretty ineffectual. And even if they find she did something wrong, they're going to fine her maybe a couple $1,000 and wipe their hands of it.
We have a precedent for that. That was the other story I wanted to talk about is the story we've talked about before, Shamia Fagan. And of course, it's related to Val Hoyle, the congresswoman, and Tina Kotek. They dropped those charges at the end of the Biden administration at the 11th hour and just washed their hands of it. You wrote an article saying because they then Fagan went in front of the Oregon Government Ethics Commission and got a low $1,000 fine, and that was it. They moved on. Um, you're saying that the DOJ should consider reopening this, the Trump DOJ, and you kind of dissected the whole farce around Shemia Fagan.
Yeah, I think the Trump DOJ should take a look at that, because it just the timing of all of it's weird. I mean, first of all, it there's so the U.S. DOJ has prosecuted in recent years a lot of or not, I shouldn't say a lot, some cannabis bribery schemes down in California, where cannabis companies were paying off these city officials so they could get their cannabis licenses. And they prosecuted them, and I think some of them are in prison now. It's the same thing that happened here, right? Like it's
There's a
not
precedent
for a
that other
license.
cases that were carried to their conclusion actually did
Yes.
involve
Yes.
prosecution and conviction.
Yep. And in this case, what happened was LaMotta gave a bunch of campaign donations to these folks, and ultimately gave a job to Shemia Fagan that paid her $20,000 before the whole thing was found out 2 months later. That's a direct personal benefit conferred to her by this LaMotta cannabis company that is trying to convince her to do certain things on their behalf in the state government. That's bribery. And then Biden drops it when he was doing all kinds of weird pardons and stuff toward the end of his term. And then it's just gone. And then
Biden knows a thing or two about bribery, by the way, as I recall.
I don't know if he knew much of anything toward the end of the term,
especially. That's true. Or remember it.
Yeah,
he's an old man with a poor memory. So I guess I think it's interesting now that he's trying to say that he actually did make every decision, such as the pardons. And we're supposed to believe an old man with a poor memory that he remembers all the pardons that someone signed with an auto pen on his behalf. But yeah, I mean, so should Tina Kotek and Val Hoyle breathe easy over this, or do you think this could actually come back and
they should breathe easier than they were last year for sure, when the feds were apparently investigating their relationship with LaMotta. So yeah, I mean,
but if the Trump DOJ takes it on and they
then they have a problem. Then they have a problem, because I suspect there's something there. I might be wrong. I don't know what evidence the FBI turned up before the investigation was closed down, but just based on stuff that's publicly available, it looks like a crime to me.
So the last thing, last story I thought we might try to touch on here before we wrap up for the day is a lobbyist briefed Tina Kotek and her staff on non-citizen registration. What's the story there? Because we know they found non-citizens that were registered. They shut down the automatic voter registration like just a week before the registration deadline last fall. And then I saw a report that they identified that there's up to 55,000 people that are non-citizens or no verification of citizenship in the voter rolls. And she got a briefing on it from a lobbyist.
Yeah. So this goes back to, so it became public in September of last year that the state had illegally registered a bunch of folks to vote who were not citizens. And so I found out I've been doing public records requests about this. And so I found out that there was this, emergency conference call the next day, which was a Saturday, that involved the top staff for governor's office, DMV, and the Secretary of State. And so, and I also found out that someone had taken notes of it. So it took them the governor's office, a long time to get me those notes. And there's still a fight about redaction they made. But the long and the short of it is that next day, what the governor's office requested a briefing from this nonprofit, Soros funded nonprofit that advocates for motor voter laws like the one Oregon has. Oregon is like a model for what they want to do in terms of automatically registering people to vote.
Jeff, it's called Vote from Home now. That's the new moniker. If you've heard that.
Really, I have not heard that term, Kevin.
Right, Wyden and Merkley and Val Hoyle are all promoting it. They say it's great for the country.
Good God. Anyway, during this call, they get this briefing from this Soros funded advocacy group, the day after, when they're literally trying to sort through what in the heck is going on. One of the first things they did was get a briefing from this lobbyist, a registered lobbyist for this Soros funded automatic voter registration group. And to me, that seems like a kind of a problem. And whether it's because the state doesn't know how their own system works enough. And this group, this is the same group or an affiliated group that actually found out that Oregon had registered the illegals in the first place. Long story. But yeah, they got a briefing from this lobbyist just the next day and actually implemented some of his suggested talking points. It's something else.
Well, they also have another thing coming their way. I just saw this yesterday. Apparently, the Justice Department, the U.S. DOJ, has filed what's called a statement of interest in Oregon elections case concerning states' obligation under the National Voter Registration Act. So they're going to start probing all this stuff, and it couldn't happen to a nicer state with a vote from home system.
Vote by home. Vote from home. Yeah, sorry.
Vote from home. Yep, or as many times as you want, apparently. Yep. But yeah, so yeah, these are just great stories. Everybody should go and check out your blog and also your podcast, which they can connect with on Oregon. It's OregonRoundup.substack.com. And your x.com account is x.com/Jeff_Eager, EAGER. And you just have the best stuff. I feel like if the feds got to hear everything you were saying, I think Oregon would actually be a different place potentially, because they seem strident at the national level to chase these things down and stand up for the right thing.
I think they have a lot of targets right now. Oregon should be one of them, but they've got a lot on their plate.
Well, thanks again for joining me here tonight. This is another great show, and I really appreciate you being on. And we'll be watching to see what your future blog posts are going to be, because Oregon is the gift that keeps giving. Every story keeps coming back.
Yep, sure does. Sure does. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. And thanks everyone for watching here tonight. Please share this show with everyone you can. And we will see you tomorrow night on the next episode of The Captive Audience. It should be some combination of Sunny and Don. Have a good night.